Single dad struggling meets mother with 3 kids asking for food. He discovers something and is shocked. Comment below with where you're watching from before we get started. Enjoy the ride. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Main Street as William Patterson adjusted his worn tool belt. His calloused hands, marked by years of honest labor, moved with practiced efficiency as he gathered the last of his supplies from Grayson's general store. The budget was tight this month, tighter than usual, but he managed a small smile when he spotted a bag of candy by the register. "Just this, too, please," William said, adding the sweets to his sparse purchase. Jackson earned himself a treat. Perfect attendance this quarter. Martha Grayson nodded approvingly as she rang him up. "That boy of yours is something special, William. Sarah would be proud." At the mention of his late wife, William's eyes softened. 3 years had passed, but the ache remained, duller now but ever present. "Hope so," was all he managed. As William stepped outside into the crisp October air, his attention was drawn to a small group huddled near the corner of the building. A woman, slender and clearly exhausted, stood protectively around 3 children whose clothes hung too loosely on their small frames. William might have walked past, his own problems were plenty, but the youngest child's eyes caught his. Big, blue, and containing a hunger that pierced straight through his carefully maintained reserve. "Everything all right, ma'am?" he asked, approaching cautiously. The woman startled, pulling her children closer. "We're fine," she replied, but her voice wavered with unmistakable fear. "Just resting." William noticed how her hands trembled as she smoothed back her eldest daughter's tangled blonde hair. Despite obvious efforts to appear put together, there was no hiding the desperation in her face. "When's the last time you all ate?" he asked directly but gently. The woman's composure faltered, pride battling necessity. "We had, yesterday, She couldn't finish. Decision made, William spoke without calculation. "My house is just up that road. It's nothing fancy, but I've got soup on the stove and bread that needs eating. You're welcome to join us." Suspicion flashed across her face. "Why would you help strangers?" William glanced down at the children again, their hopeful expressions barely contained. "Because someone once helped me when Jackson and I needed it." He extended his hand. "I'm William Patterson." She hesitated before accepting his handshake, her grip surprisingly firm despite her fragile appearance. "Elizabeth," she said finally. "Elizabeth Reynolds, and these are my children, Emma, Alice, and Matthew." "Nice to meet you all," William replied, offering a genuine smile to the children. "Now, how about that soup before it gets cold?" As they walked toward his modest home, William couldn't have known that this simple act of kindness would forever alter the course of their lives, nor that the woman walking tentatively beside him was connected to his past in ways that would soon shatter his carefully rebuilt world. The humble kitchen in William's home had never felt so full of life. The old oak table, scarred from years of use and normally occupied only by him and Jackson, now seated 5 hungry souls. Elizabeth's children attacked their bowls of vegetable stew with barely restrained desperation, manners momentarily forgotten in the face of genuine hunger. "Slow down a bit," Elizabeth gently reminded, though her own spoon moved quickly. "There's plenty." William busied himself slicing more of the homemade bread, pretending not to notice the tears that threatened at the corners of her eyes. The simple meal he prepared seemed to affect her more deeply than mere food should. "Dad makes the best bread," Jackson announced proudly, his usual shyness temporarily forgotten as he addressed Emma, the oldest of Elizabeth's children. "He says Grandma taught him the secret." "What's the secret?" asked little Matthew, mouth still half full. William winked. "Can't tell. It's a Patterson family mystery." The children giggled, tension melting away like ice in spring sunshine. For a moment, they were just children again, not refugees from whatever storm had driven them here. When the meal ended, Jackson volunteered to show the others his modest toy collection in the small bedroom he would temporarily share with William. The adults found themselves alone, mugs of hot tea warming their hands in the growing silence. "Thank you," Elizabeth finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have no idea what this means." "No need for thanks," William replied simply. She looked up, studying him with eyes that had seen too much hardship. "People don't just take in strangers these days, especially not a woman with 3 children." William shrugged. "Maple Creek's different. Small towns still look after people." "Or maybe you're different," Elizabeth countered, a hint of her true self emerging beneath layers of exhaustion. Something compelled her to trust this quiet, steady man, perhaps desperation, or perhaps something in those kind eyes that carried their own familiar weight of grief. "We left in the middle of the night," she began hesitantly. "3 days ago. My husband, Richard, he's not who everyone thinks he is." William remained silent, allowing her space to continue. "To the world, he's brilliant, successful, charming." Her fingers tightened around the mug. "At home, he's a monster." The word hung heavy between them. "The last time he threatened the children, that's when I knew we couldn't stay." She looked up, defiance flashing through her fear. "I won't let them grow up thinking that's normal." William nodded, understanding immediately. "You did the right thing." "Did I? We have nowhere to go. No money." She stopped abruptly. "He'll find us. Richard Reynolds always gets what he wants." William froze, the name hitting him like a physical blow. "Reynolds? Richard Reynolds of Rain Tech Solutions?" Elizabeth's eyes widened. "You know him?" The bitter taste of memory filled William's mouth as the cruel symmetry of fate revealed itself. "I worked for him years ago, before he fired me for refusing to cut corners on safety standards." The revelation hung between them, a connection neither could have anticipated. "Oh my God," Elizabeth whispered. The kitchen fell silent as the weight of William's revelation settled between them. For a moment, Elizabeth's face paled, her fingers trembling around her mug. "You worked for Richard?" Her voice was barely audible. William nodded, memories flooding back. 8 years ago, I supervised safety systems for his early factories. When I refused to approve shortcuts that would have endangered workers, he had me blacklisted in the industry. His jaw tightened. "Lost my contracting business. Nearly lost our home. Had to reinvent myself as a carpenter." Elizabeth closed her eyes. "That sounds exactly like him. Anyone who stands against Richard becomes an enemy." A crash from the living room broke the tension. They rushed in to find Matthew standing beside a shattered photo frame, terror in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he cried. "I didn't mean to." William knelt beside the frightened boy, whose small body had begun to shake. "Hey, it's okay. Just glass." He carefully picked up the fallen photograph of Sarah, his late wife, her smile forever preserved on their wedding day. Matthew flinched when William reached toward him, a reaction that told its own story. "No one's going to hurt you here," William said softly, noticing Elizabeth's pained expression. "Accidents happen." As William cleaned up the glass, Elizabeth gathered Matthew into her arms, whispering reassurances. The other children watched cautiously from the doorway, their behavior revealing patterns formed by fear. Later, after Elizabeth had settled her children in Jackson's room, the boy happily volunteering to sleep on the couch, she returned to find William on the porch, staring at the stars. "They're afraid of men raising their voices," she said, joining him. "Of sudden movements, of making mistakes." Her voice broke. "That's what he did to them." William's hands gripped the porch railing. "And to you? The physical bruises heal," she whispered. "It's the other wounds that don't." An owl called from the darkness, its lonely sound echoing through the trees. "You know he'll come looking," William said finally. Elizabeth nodded. "We can leave tomorrow. I won't bring his rage down on your home." "That's not what I meant." William turned to face her, determination hardening his features. You need somewhere safe, and right now, that's here. Stay, at least until you figure out your next steps. Why would you risk that, especially knowing who he is? William thought of the frightened children, of Elizabeth's courage in fleeing with nothing, and of his own bitter history with Richard Reynolds. Maybe because some things are worth standing up for, he said simply. Or maybe I'm just stubborn that way. A ghost of a smile touched Elizabeth's lips, the first he'd seen. My mother would have called that righteous foolishness. My dad would have said the same, William replied, returning her smile. As they stood in comfortable silence, watching fireflies blink in the darkness, neither realized they had already formed an alliance more powerful than Richard Reynolds's wealth or rage, one built on shared understanding and the fierce need to protect what mattered most. Inside, the children slept peacefully for the first time in months, their breathing finally deep and untroubled in the safety of William Patterson's modest home. Morning light streamed through the worn curtains of William's kitchen as he quietly prepared breakfast. The familiar routine of measuring flour and heating the griddle brought comfort in the midst of the previous day's revelations. He moved with practiced efficiency, the sizzle of pancakes a gentle backdrop to his thoughts. Elizabeth appeared in the doorway, hair damp from a shower, wearing clothes Martha Grayson had discreetly dropped off the night before. I haven't slept that well in months, she admitted, hesitantly entering his space. Can I help? William gestured to the coffee pot. There are mugs in that cabinet. They worked in surprisingly comfortable silence, Elizabeth setting the table while William flipped perfectly golden pancakes. When the children tumbled in, eyes wide at the sight of the breakfast feast, something in William's chest tightened. Real maple syrup, Jackson announced proudly to the others. Dad and I tapped the trees ourselves. Matthew climbed onto a chair, looking uncertainly at William. We're allowed to have some. The innocent question revealed volumes about their past life. William nodded, keeping his expression neutral despite the anger building inside. As much as you want, buddy. After breakfast, Elizabeth insisted on washing dishes, refusing William's protests. I need to contribute, she said firmly. I won't be a charity case. William recognized the pride beneath her words. There's dignity in accepting help when it's needed, he said quietly. And giving back when you can. Later, while Jackson showed the children his father's workshop behind the house, Elizabeth explored the modest living room. She stopped at a bookshelf filled with worn paperbacks and framed photographs. William found her studying a picture of Sarah, her finger tracing the glass thoughtfully. She was beautiful, Elizabeth said. Yes, William's response was simple but carried the weight of years of grief. Cancer, he added after a moment. 3 years ago. Jackson was 7. Elizabeth turned, recognition in her eyes. That's why you understood. You've rebuilt a life, too. William nodded. One day at a time. Outside, childish laughter floated through the open window. Elizabeth moved toward the sound like a plant seeking light. He never let them be loud, she confessed. Everything had to be perfect, controlled, even their laughter. William's jaw tightened. Children should be children. I stayed too long, she whispered, guilt shadowing her features. Convinced myself it was for their security, their future. You left, William countered. That's what matters. When Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears, William instinctively reached toward her, then hesitated. She noticed, understanding immediately. It's been a while since a man's touch didn't make me flinch, she admitted. Their eyes met in shared understanding before Emma burst through the door, excitedly pulling Elizabeth toward the workshop to see the birdhouse Jackson was helping them build. That evening, as the children played a board game at the kitchen table, William quietly sketched plans for an addition to his workshop. What are you designing? Elizabeth asked, peering over his shoulder. Just an idea, he replied. Teaching space. Figured you might want to learn some basics. Could be useful skills. He didn't say what they both knew, that she needed ways to support herself, to build independence. Elizabeth studied him, wonder slowly replacing suspicion in her eyes. "Why are you really helping us, William?" He considered the question, pencil tapping against paper. "Because it's right," he finally said, "and because everyone deserves a chance to rebuild." The morning dew still clung to the grass as William loaded lumber into his truck. He nodded to Sheriff Davis, who slowed his patrol car alongside the driveway. "Morning, Will," the sheriff called. "Heard you've got company staying." News traveled faster than light in Maple Creek. William straightened, wiping sawdust from his hands. Elizabeth and her kids needed a place. "Just helping out." Davis removed his sunglasses, his expression unreadable. "Pretty lady with 3 children shows up out of nowhere. People are talking." "Let them," William replied evenly. "Just looking out for you." Davis replaced his sunglasses. "Woman like that, well-spoken, those fancy mannerisms, seems out of place here. Might be running from something, or someone," he said meaningfully. Understanding crossed the sheriff's weathered face. "That kind of trouble." William nodded. Davis sighed. "Keep me posted if anything feels off. Clara's putting together some clothes for the little ones. We'll drop them by later." As the patrol car pulled away, William noticed Elizabeth watching from the porch, tension visible in her posture. "Sheriff Davis," William explained, approaching her. "Good man. His wife, Clara, teaches at the elementary school. He was asking about us," she stated, not a question. William nodded. "Small towns notice newcomers, but these people look after their own." "We're not their own," Elizabeth said softly. "You are now," he replied simply. "That's how it works here." Throughout the day, neighbors happened by with casseroles, children's books, and hand-me-down clothes. Mrs. Winters from the library brought application forms for library cards. Old Mr. Jenkins offered Elizabeth's oldest, Emma, a weekend job helping in his flower shop. Each visitor studied Elizabeth with curious eyes, but the kindness seemed genuine. It overwhelmed her, this casual generosity without expectation. "They'll want something eventually," she whispered to William after Mrs. Thompson left with promises of returning with school enrollment information. William shook his head. "That's not how community works here. They help because someday they might need help, too." Elizabeth struggled to comprehend such a foreign concept. That evening, as she helped William prepare dinner, she finally asked the question that had been bothering her. "Why did you stay? After what Richard did to your career, you could have moved anywhere, started fresh." William considered as he chopped vegetables. "This was Sarah's hometown. After she got sick, the people here carried us through. Jackson needs that stability, those connections." He smiled slightly. "Besides, there's honor in simple work, building something real with your hands." The moment was interrupted by Jackson bursting through the door, excitement radiating from him. "Dad! Coach Miller says Emma, Alice, and Matthew can join us for swim practice at the lake tomorrow." Elizabeth tensed visibly. "I don't know if that's." "Please, Mom," Emma pleaded, appearing behind Jackson. "We haven't been swimming in forever." The happiness in her daughter's voice made Elizabeth pause. How long had it been since her children had experienced normal childhood activities? "We'll all go," William suggested gently. "I could use a break from the workshop anyway." Later, as stars appeared overhead, William sat on the porch steps, listening to the nighttime chorus of crickets. He didn't hear Elizabeth join him until she spoke. "In my old life, we had everything, private schools, designer clothes, vacation homes." She wrapped her arms around herself. "And my children were terrified in their own home." William waited, giving her space to continue. "I thought I was protecting them by staying," she whispered. "What kind of mother does that make me?" "A survivor," William answered without hesitation. "And now, a fighter." Their eyes met in the darkness, a silent understanding passing between them, two broken people finding unexpected strength in each other's company. Neither noticed the black sedan that drove slowly past the house, its tinted windows concealing the driver who watched with calculating eyes. The clock on William's nightstand read 2:17 a.m. when the scream tore through the quiet house. He bolted upright, disoriented for only a moment before racing down the hallway, instincts guiding him through the darkness. Elizabeth was sitting up in the guest bed, eyes wide with terror, hands twisted in the sheets. She didn't seem to see him standing in the doorway, her gaze fixed on horrors only she could perceive. "Elizabeth," he called softly, keeping his distance. "You're safe. You're in Maple Creek, at my house." Recognition slowly dawned in her eyes as she returned to reality. "William," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry." "The children are still asleep," he assured her. "You didn't wake them." She nodded, embarrassment replacing fear as she became fully aware of her surroundings. "The nightmares, they come most nights." William leaned against the door frame, careful to leave plenty of space between them. "Would you like some tea?" "I find it helps when sleep won't come." In the kitchen, the soft glow of a single lamp created an island of warmth. Elizabeth wrapped her hands around the steaming mug of chamomile, her breathing gradually steadying. "In my dream, he found us," she admitted. "He was taking the children away one by one, and I couldn't move." William nodded, understanding the particular cruelty of nightmares. The mind processes fear in its own time. "Do you have them, too?" she asked, studying his face. "Different ghosts, same haunting," he replied. "Some nights, I still reach across the bed for Sarah or dream that I missed some symptom, some sign that could have saved her." The honesty in his voice created a bridge between them, spanning their different pains. "How did you manage after she died?" Elizabeth asked. William gazed into his tea. "One breath at a time. For Jackson's sake at first, then eventually for my own." He looked up. "The nights were the hardest. That's when the silence is loudest." Elizabeth nodded, recognizing the truth in his words. "With Richard, I was never alone but always lonely, constantly watched, criticized, controlled." She shivered. "Sometimes, I still feel his eyes on me." "He's not here," William said firmly. "And if he comes, he'll have to go through me first." The unexpected fierceness in his gentle voice surprised them both. Elizabeth blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "I never fought back," she confessed, shame coloring her words. "All that education, the career I abandoned, and I just disappeared into his world, became what he wanted." "Survival isn't weakness," William countered. "You protected your children the best way you knew how. And when that wasn't enough, you found the courage to leave." Dawn was approaching when they finally returned to their rooms, a new understanding between them. As Elizabeth settled back under the covers, she realized the weight on her chest had lightened slightly. For the first time in years, she had spoken her truth and been believed without question. Down the hall, William stood at his window, watching the stars fade. As morning approached, he found himself thinking of Sarah, remembering how she'd urged him to keep his heart open even as hers was failing. "Life isn't finished with you yet," she'd whispered during those final days. Looking toward the guest room where Elizabeth now slept, William wondered if perhaps Sarah had been right. The Saturday morning sun bathed the lake shore in golden light as families spread blankets across the sandy beach. Children splashed in the shallows, their laughter carrying across the water, while parents chatted in clusters beneath colorful umbrellas. Elizabeth sat at the edge of a faded quilt, watching her children with wonder. Alice and Matthew built elaborate sandcastles with Jackson, while Emma waded cautiously into the water with some local girls her age. It had been so long since she'd seen them this carefree, this normal. "Lemonade?" William offered, settling beside her with 2 plastic cups. "Mrs. Miller's famous recipe. Secret ingredient is fresh mint." "Thank you." Elizabeth accepted the drink, their fingers brushing momentarily. "This all feels surreal." A month ago, the children were attending formal piano lessons and mandatory etiquette classes. Now, they're catching tadpoles and coming home with scraped knees. William smiled. And which version seems happier? She watched as Matthew squealed with delight when Jackson showed him how to skip stones across the water's surface. No contest. Coach Miller blew his whistle, gathering the swim team for practice. Emma looked toward Elizabeth, seeking permission. When she nodded encouragement, her daughter's face lit up with surprised joy as she jogged to join the others. She's quite the natural swimmer, William observed. Jackson says she's faster than most of the kids who've trained all year. Pride warmed Elizabeth's chest. Richard never approved of team sports. Too uncontrolled, too democratic. He preferred individual achievements that could be measured and showcased. William leaned back on his elbows, watching the children. Sometimes, the most important lessons come from being part of something bigger than yourself. The peaceful moment was interrupted by Martha Grayson approaching, a covered dish in hand. "William Patterson, you've been holding out on us," she teased good-naturedly. "Elizabeth, your furniture designs are absolutely exquisite. William showed me the sketches you did for the Miller's dining set." Elizabeth blushed. "It's just a hobby. I studied design before I became a full-time mother." Martha finished kindly. "Well, talent like yours shouldn't go to waste. Half the town's already asking if you two are taking commissions." After Martha moved on, Elizabeth turned to William. "You showed her my sketches?" He shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "They're good. Really good. My craftsmanship and your design sense, we could make something special together." The simplicity of his belief in her abilities left Elizabeth momentarily speechless. Richard had always dismissed her creative pursuits as frivolous distractions from her duties as his wife. "We're fitting in here," she said quietly, watching Matthew build a sandcastle with an elderly man who was teaching him to use driftwood for flagpoles. "I never thought we could belong somewhere so quickly." William's eyes met hers, serious now. "You were always meant to be more than someone's possession, Elizabeth. You and the children." She looked away, uncomfortable with the truth that vibrated in his words. "This peace can't last forever. Richard won't just let us disappear." William's hand found hers on the blanket between them, a gentle, undemanding touch. "Whatever comes, you don't face it alone anymore." As the afternoon sun warmed their shoulders, Elizabeth realized she was beginning to believe him. William wiped sweat from his brow as he placed the final beam across the workshop expansion. The past 3 weeks had transformed not just the small building but the rhythm of life in his home. Elizabeth's design skills, combined with his craftsmanship, had brought in more commissions than he'd seen in years. The hollow spaces, once filled only with memories, now echoed with new voices, new purpose. "Need a hand?" Sheriff Davis called, climbing out of his patrol car. William descended the ladder, noting the unusual tension in his friend's normally relaxed demeanor. "Something wrong, Frank?" The sheriff glanced toward the house, where Elizabeth and the children were baking cookies. "Got a call from the county clerk's office. Someone's been asking questions about property records." "Your property, specifically?" William's stomach tightened. "Private investigator. Fancy law firm from the city?" Davis confirmed. Reynolds and Associates made inquiries. The name hung in the warm afternoon air like a thundercloud. William had been expecting this, but the reality still hit hard. "He found them," William said flatly. Davis nodded grimly. "Likely, but I've got friends watching the roads into town. You'll have warning if anyone shows up." After the sheriff left, William stood motionless in the yard, mind racing. They needed a plan, contingencies. The peaceful weeks had made it too easy to forget the threat looming beyond their small-town sanctuary. Inside the house, laughter drifted from the kitchen. William paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. Matthew sat on the counter, face dusted with flour as he messily stirred cookie dough. Alice carefully arranged chocolate chips in perfect patterns, while Emma and Jackson debated the merits of peanut butter versus chocolate. Elizabeth moved among them, her smile relaxed in a way he'd never seen before. He couldn't bear to break this moment of normalcy. Later that night, after the children were asleep, William placed a white envelope on the kitchen table where Elizabeth was sketching new designs. "What's this?" she asked, opening it to find several $100s. "You're half of the Henderson Commission," William explained. "We're partners now, remember?" Elizabeth stared at the money, the first she'd earned herself in nearly a decade. "William, I can't." "You can," he interrupted gently. "Your designs are what's bringing in these orders." She carefully set the money aside, tears threatening. "I never thought I'd feel this capable again." William sat across from her, knowing he could no longer delay the difficult conversation. "Elizabeth, there's something we need to discuss." He told her about the sheriff's visit, watching as the hard-won peace drained from her expression. "So, he's found us," she whispered, fingers trembling against the tabletop. "Not yet, but he's looking. We need to be prepared." Elizabeth's shoulders straightened, the fragile woman receding as the protective mother emerged. "The children need to know what to do if he comes." Safe words, meeting places. William nodded, admiring her strength. "We'll make a plan together." As midnight approached, they sat side by side on the porch steps, a hastily created safety protocol between them. The night was unusually quiet, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "I won't let him take this from us," Elizabeth said suddenly, her voice stronger than he'd ever heard it. "This life we're building, the children's happiness." William's hand found hers in the darkness, their fingers intertwining naturally now, fear and determination flowing between them like an electric current. "Neither will I," he promised, as a distant car's headlights appeared on the far edge of town, moving slowly toward them through the night. The headlights drew closer, then veered away down a side road. William's shoulders relaxed slightly, but the momentary reprieve did little to ease their growing tension. For 3 days, they'd been living on high alert, strange cars passing too slowly, hang-up calls to the landline, a feeling of being watched that neither could shake. William doubled his efforts on the workshop security, installing motion lights and reinforced locks. Elizabeth created emergency bags for each child, hidden but accessible. They developed code words, escape routes, and meeting points, all practiced as safety games to avoid frightening the children unnecessarily. That evening, thunder rolled across the valley as William finished the last of the dinner dishes. Elizabeth tucked her children into bed while Jackson helped William secure the windows against the approaching storm. "Dad," Jackson whispered, his voice unusually serious. "I don't want Elizabeth and the others to leave." William ruffled his son's hair. "I know, buddy. Are we going to protect them if that bad man comes?" The directness of the question caught William off guard. Sometimes he forgot how perceptive 10-year-olds could be. "We'll do our best," he answered honestly. The storm hit with unexpected ferocity. Rain lashed against the windows while lightning split the sky open. By midnight, the power had failed, plunging the house into darkness, broken only by candles and the occasional flash of lightning. William made one final check of the doors before settling onto the living room couch. Elizabeth appeared in the hallway, wrapped in a borrowed sweater too large for her frame. "The children are finally asleep," she said, sitting beside him. "The storm scared them." Jackson, too, William admitted, though he'd never admit it. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the rain. Elizabeth's hand found his in the darkness, a gesture that had become natural between them. "William," she began hesitantly. "If Richard does come." "When," he corrected gently. "Men like him always come." "When he comes," she amended, "I want you to know that these weeks have been." She struggled to find the words. "More real than anything I've experienced in years." William's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "For me, too." The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious. Elizabeth leaned closer, her breath warm against his cheek. Their lips were mere inches apart when the smell hit them, acrid, chemical, wrong. Smoke. They bolted upright simultaneously. William flung open the back door to see orange flames licking up the side of his workshop, spreading unnaturally fast despite the rain. Accelerant, he realized aloud. This isn't an accident. Elizabeth's face drained of color. The children. Get them out, William ordered. Use the front door. I'll call for help. As Elizabeth raced toward the bedrooms, William grabbed the fire extinguisher and sprinted into the downpour. The flames had already engulfed half the workshop, spreading toward the house with terrifying speed. He fought desperately to contain the blaze, but the fire seemed to have a malevolent will of its own, consuming everything in its path. When the propane tank in the workshop exploded, the force threw William backward onto the muddy ground. Through dazed eyes, he saw flames crawling up the side of the house toward the children's bedroom. A scream tore from inside, Alice's high-pitched cry of terror. William staggered to his feet, ignoring the burning pain across his shoulder where embers had landed. Nothing mattered except reaching those children. As he stumbled toward the inferno, a dark figure emerged from the tree-line, watching with cold satisfaction as William Patterson's world burned to ashes around him. The antiseptic smell of the hospital room cut through William's consciousness before he could fully open his eyes. Pain radiated across his back and shoulders, each breath a struggle against tight bandages. The steady beep of monitors formed a rhythmic backdrop to his confusion. William. A soft voice called him back from the haze. Elizabeth's face swam into focus, exhaustion etched into every line. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and a smudge of soot still marked her temple. Her hand rested lightly on his, careful to avoid the foreline. The children, he rasped, throat raw from smoke. Safe, she assured him immediately. All of them. Jackson's with Emma at Sheriff Davis's house. Alice and Matthew are down the hall with Mrs. Thompson. Relief washed over him, more powerful than any pain medication. Fragments of memory returned, flames climbing the walls, carrying Matthew's limp form through choking smoke, returning again and again until all 4 children were safely outside. The house, he asked, already knowing the answer from the devastation in her eyes. Gone, Elizabeth whispered. Everything except the old oak tree. William closed his eyes, absorbing the loss, the home he'd built with Sarah, repaired with his own hands after she died, filled with memories both painful and precious, all reduced to ashes. It was Richard, Elizabeth said, voice hardening. The sheriff found evidence of accelerant. Professional job. Coward, William muttered, attacking children while they sleep. Elizabeth's fingers tightened around his. You saved them, William. The doctor said you shouldn't have been able to keep going back in with those burns, but you did. He had no memory of pain during those desperate minutes, only the singular focus of reaching each child. Now, however, his body reminded him with every movement of the price he'd paid. A nurse entered, checking William's vitals with professional efficiency. You're quite the town hero, Mr. Patterson, she said, adjusting his fore. Half of Maple Creek is in the waiting room. After she left, Elizabeth moved closer, brushing hair from his forehead with a tenderness that made his chest tighten. The whole town has rallied, she told him. The church opened its shelter. People are donating clothes, toys, everything we need. Sheriff Davis has deputies watching the hospital. William nodded, exhaustion pulling at him. You should rest, too. Elizabeth shook her head. I'll stay. Elizabeth, he began, needing to say what might be their only chance. If this is too much danger. She pressed a finger gently to his lips. Don't offer me an exit. Not now. The fierceness in her voice surprised him. I've spent years running from conflict, thinking silence meant peace, she continued. But there's a difference between peace and emptiness. What we've built here, the workshop, the designs, the family we're becoming, that's worth fighting for. William studied her face, seeing not the frightened woman who had appeared at the market weeks ago, but someone stronger, someone who had reclaimed pieces of herself thought lost forever. Besides, she added, the ghost of a smile touching her lips, I'm not the only one who needs you anymore. As if summoned by her words, the door cracked open, and 4 small faces peered in, Jackson, Emma, Alice, and Matthew, their eyes wide with worry and relief. "Dad," Jackson whispered. William managed a smile through his pain. "Come here, all of you." As the children carefully gathered around his bed, William felt something stir beneath his grief and pain, not just determination, but hope. For days after the fire, William was released from the hospital. The doctors had marveled at his recovery, though deep burns across his back and shoulders would take months to fully heal. Sheriff Davis personally drove him to the small rental cabin at the edge of town that the community had prepared for them. "Home sweet temporary home," the sheriff announced as he helped William up the porch steps. The cabin's door burst open before they reached it. Jackson flew into his father's arms, careful of the bandages but desperate for the contact. Behind him stood Elizabeth and her children, their faces lighting up with relief. "Easy there, sport," William winced, but held his son close. Inside, the cabin was modestly furnished with donations from townspeople, a patchwork of chairs, beds, and kitchen items. A hand-stitched quilt hung on the wall with a simple message, "Family isn't always blood." Elizabeth guided William to a recliner by the window. "The children are with Mrs. Winters at the library," she said once Jackson had gone to fetch water. "I wanted to speak with you alone first." The seriousness in her tone made William straighten despite his pain. "Richard is here," she said without preamble. "In town. Sheriff Davis confirmed it this morning." William's jaw tightened. "Has he approached you?" "Not yet. He's staying at the inn, making a show of searching for his missing family." Her voice turned bitter. Playing the concerned husband and father while his hired men burned down houses with children inside. Before William could respond, a sleek black car pulled up outside. Elizabeth tensed visibly as a tall, impeccably dressed man stepped out, accompanied by another man carrying a briefcase. "That's his lawyer, James Harrington," Elizabeth whispered. "They're coming here." William struggled to stand, ignoring the pain shooting across his back. "Let them come." The knock that followed seemed to echo through the small cabin. Sheriff Davis opened the door, positioning himself protectively in the entryway. Richard Reynolds stood framed in the doorway, every inch the successful businessman in his tailored suit. His handsome features arranged themselves into an expression of concern as his eyes found Elizabeth. "Thank God you're safe," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I've been worried sick." Elizabeth remained silent, her body rigid with fear and anger. Richard's gaze shifted to William, hardening instantly. "Patterson," he said coldly. "I should have known you'd be involved in this situation." William met his stare evenly. "Elizabeth and the children are here by choice, Reynolds." "Their choice?" Richard smiled thinly. "My wife is clearly not in her right mind. Taking my children, living in." He glanced around dismissively. "These conditions." "I am not your possession," Elizabeth said suddenly, her voice stronger than any of them expected. "Neither are our children." Richard's facade cracked slightly. "This isn't the place for this discussion, Elizabeth. Come home. We can sort this out privately." "Like you sorted out William's home?" Elizabeth challenged. "With gasoline and matches?" Richard's lawyer stepped forward smoothly. "Mr. Reynolds has been in the city with dozens of witnesses. These accusations are slanderous." Sheriff Davis crossed his arms. "Funny thing about small towns, Mr. Harrington. We notice strangers, especially ones hanging around before houses mysteriously catch fire." Richard's expression darkened. I came to make a reasonable offer, he said, turning to Elizabeth. Return home with our children immediately, and I'll ensure Mr. Patterson receives the finest medical care money can buy. Refuse, and I'll have him arrested for kidnapping. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Elizabeth slowly rose from her chair, walked to William's side, and placed her hand firmly on his shoulder. Get out, she said simply. You have no power here. The door closed behind Richard Reynolds with a decisive click, but his presence lingered like a toxic cloud. Elizabeth's hand trembled where it rested on William's shoulder, though her face remained resolute. He'll be back, Sheriff Davis warned, settling his hat back on his head. Men like that don't take rejection well. William reached up to cover Elizabeth's hand with his own. We'll be ready. After the sheriff left, Elizabeth sank into the chair opposite William, the momentary courage draining from her. He'll use every resource he has, the children, the courts, his money. But he doesn't have the truth, William countered gently. Or the town. The truth emerged piece by piece over the following days. Richard filed emergency custody petitions, claiming Elizabeth was mentally unstable and William was a dangerous influence. His lawyers descended on Maple Creek like expensive vultures, combing through William's past, trying to find something, anything, to use against him. What they found instead was a town united. Mrs. Thompson from the school board testified about the children's improved behavior and academic progress. Dr. Roberts documented Elizabeth's recovery from stress and anxiety. Even old Mr. Jenkins, who rarely left his flower shop, came to court to speak about Emma's responsibility and work ethic. 1 week after Richard's appearance at the cabin, Elizabeth sat at the small kitchen table, staring at legal documents delivered by courier. The children were asleep, and William had stepped outside to check the security measures Sheriff Davis had installed. He's offering a settlement, she said when William returned, pushing the papers toward him. Full custody of the children for me, a generous financial package, a house in any city of my choosing. She paused. As long as it's at least 500 miles from here. William absorbed the implications, his heart sinking. He's trying to separate us. It's a good offer, Elizabeth whispered, not meeting his eyes. More than most women in my situation ever get. William sat across from her, pain flaring across his healing burns. Is it what you want? What I want. She looked up, tears threatening. I want my children safe. I want to stop looking over my shoulder. I want. Her voice broke. I want to stay here with you in Jackson. I want the life we were building. Then we fight, William said simply. Elizabeth shook her head. You don't understand what he's capable of. This cabin, the community support, it's all temporary. Eventually, people will tire of our drama. Richard never tires. He'll drag this out until everyone abandons us. William reached across the table, taking her hands in his. Elizabeth, look at me. When she did, he continued. My entire life fell apart once before. I lost my career, nearly lost this town, and then lost Sarah. But I rebuilt, not alone, with help, with community. He squeezed her hands gently. Whatever you decide, I will respect it. But don't choose out of fear. She studied his face, seeing the sincerity there, the quiet strength that had drawn her from the beginning. The children adore you, she whispered. And I them, he replied. But this has to be your choice. Not mine. Not Richard's. Yours. Elizabeth stood suddenly, walking to the window. Outside, fireflies blinked in the growing darkness like scattered stars. In the distance, she could see the lights of town, the church steeple, the library where her children had discovered the joy of reading without judgment. She turned back to William, something new and determined forming in her eyes. I choose this, she said firmly. I choose us. The late September sun cast long shadows across what remained of William's property. Blackened timber and twisted metal marked where the house had once stood, but today, the scene buzzed with new energy. Dozens of townspeople moved with organized efficiency, transforming destruction into possibility. Sheriff Davis had called it an old-fashioned barn raising, though they weren't building a barn. Men from the lumberyard, construction workers, electricians, and plumbers had volunteered their services. Women organized food stations, children carried tools, and even elderly residents supervised from lawn chairs, calling out suggestions and encouragement. Elizabeth stood slightly apart, overwhelmed by the display of community strength. 3 months had passed since her rejection of Richard's settlement offer, 3 months of legal battles, temporary restraining orders, and testimony. Richard had leveraged every advantage his wealth could buy, but faced an unexpected opponent in the united front of Maple Creek. "Amazing, isn't it?" William said, joining her. His burns had healed remarkably well, though the scars remained visible when he rolled up his sleeves to work. "I've never seen anything like this," Elizabeth admitted. "All these people giving up their Saturday for us." "For family," William corrected gently. "That's how they see you now." Elizabeth watched as Emma helped Mrs. Jenkins arrange flowers for the lunch tables, confidence radiating from her once timid daughter. Nearby, Alice and Matthew played with other children their age, their laughter free and uninhibited. Jackson worked alongside the men, proudly carrying his father's smaller tools, his chest puffed with importance. "He's growing up so fast," she observed. William nodded, a mixture of pride and wistfulness in his expression. "Too fast, but in all the right ways." A truck pulled up, carrying limestone for the new foundation. Elizabeth recognized it as part of her settlement funds, the portion Richard couldn't legally withhold. She had insisted on using it to rebuild what he had destroyed. "I made some adjustments to the plans," she said tentatively, pulling folded blueprints from her pocket. "If that's all right." William studied her changes with growing appreciation. She had expanded the workshop space, added a sunlit studio corner, and, most significantly, designed the home to accommodate all 6 of them permanently. "It's perfect," he said softly. "Are you sure? It's your land. Your home." William's hand found hers, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Our home," he corrected. "If that's what you want." Elizabeth nodded, unable to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. Mayor Thompson approached, wiping sweat from his brow. "Foundation teams ready whenever you are, Will." The traditional cornerstone ceremony was simple but meaningful. William and Elizabeth stood together, surrounded by their children and the entire community. Sheriff Davis presented them with a small metal box for the foundation, something of meaning to anchor the new home. One by one, they added items. Jackson placed a small wooden carving he'd made with his father. Emma contributed a sketch of all 6 of them together. Alice added a seashell from their first trip to the lake, and Matthew, a colorful stone he treasured. Elizabeth hesitated before adding her contribution, the diamond wedding ring Richard had once used to claim her as property. "For new beginnings," she whispered. William placed a photograph of Sarah, smiling from beneath her favorite oak tree. "For remembering where we came from," he explained to the children, who nodded with solemn understanding. As the box was sealed and placed within the cornerstone, William addressed the gathered community. "Thank you isn't enough, but it's what we have to offer. This home will always have an open door for each of you who helped rebuild it." Mayor Thompson stepped forward. "Before we continue, there's one more item of business." He produced an official-looking document. "The town council met yesterday. In light of recent events, we voted unanimously to appoint William Patterson as our new building inspector and safety commissioner." Murmurs of approval spread through the crowd. "It's about time someone with actual integrity filled that position," old Mr. Jenkins called out. William stood speechless, the significance not lost on him. The very skills and principles that Richard Reynolds had punished him for would now become his livelihood. Later, as community members continued working on the foundation, Elizabeth found William standing beneath the old oak tree that had miraculously survived the fire. "You deserve this," she said quietly. "All of it." William turned to her, emotion raw in his eyes. "So do you. So do they." Together, they watched their children playing among the construction materials, already claiming the skeleton of their new home as their own. The future stretched before them, not perfect or without challenges, but theirs to build together, one carefully placed stone at a time. A crisp November morning painted Maple Creek in shades of amber and gold. The new Patterson house stood nearly complete, its warm wooden exterior and wide porch welcoming even before the final touches. Though smaller than Elizabeth's former mansion, it possessed something her old home never had, genuine warmth that emanated from every carefully crafted corner. Today marked a special occasion, not a housewarming exactly, but something more meaningful. William had been mysterious about the plans, simply asking everyone to gather at the property at noon. Elizabeth stood at the kitchen window, watching the children help William in the side yard. They had spent the morning digging a large hole, their faces serious with concentration. Whatever William had planned clearly had their complete support. "Everything ready?" she asked, stepping onto the porch with a thermos of hot cider. William nodded, dirt smudging his cheek. "Just about." He gestured toward a burlap-wrapped object leaning against the tool shed. "That's the last piece." By noon, nearly half the town had arrived, gathering in a loose circle around the freshly dug hole. Sheriff Davis, Mayor Thompson, the teachers, shopkeepers, and neighbors who had become their extended family all stood expectantly as William stepped forward. "Thank you all for coming," he began, voice steady but full of emotion. "When we lost our home, we didn't just lose walls and a roof. We lost history, memories, the physical foundation of our lives." Elizabeth moved closer, sensing the depth of what was coming. "But what we've gained," William continued, "is something far more valuable." He gestured to Elizabeth and the children. "A new family, a second chance." He unwrapped the burlap, revealing a young oak sapling, its roots carefully packed in soil. "This tree comes from the same forest where Sarah and I used to walk, where Jackson took his first steps. It's a piece of our past." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears as she understood. "Today, we're planting this tree not to replace what was lost, but to mark what's been found," William explained. "As it grows, so will we, together." He motioned the children forward. Each took a turn shoveling soil around the sapling after it was placed in the prepared hole. Jackson went first, then Emma, Alice, and finally little Matthew, who required William's help to manage the heavy shovel. When it was Elizabeth's turn, William handed her something unexpected, a small, handcrafted wooden box with intricate carving along its edges. "What's this?" she whispered. "Open it," he encouraged gently. Inside nestled 5 hand-carved wooden hearts, each with a name: William, Elizabeth, Jackson, Emma, Alice, and Matthew. "I've been working on these at night," he explained. "One for each of us, if you're willing. I thought we could bury them with the tree roots, a promise to stay rooted together, no matter what storms come." Elizabeth couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the simple perfection of the gesture. Instead, she knelt beside the sapling, placing the box carefully among its roots. The children added their handfuls of soil, then stepped back as William finished, securing the young tree with stakes and wire. Mayor Thompson stepped forward, clearing his throat. "In keeping with town tradition, I propose we name this the Promise Tree, as a reminder that some vows don't require legal papers to be binding." He glanced meaningfully at William and Elizabeth. The gathered townspeople murmured approval, many wiping away tears. As the afternoon continued with shared food and conversation, Elizabeth found William standing alone beside the newly planted tree. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" he asked. "For showing us that family isn't built of perfect materials, but with perfect intention." She reached for his hand. "For giving my children roots when they thought they'd only ever have wings." William's fingers intertwined with hers, warm and strong. Some things were meant to grow together, he said softly, looking from the sapling to the children playing nearby. I think we're one of them. 1 year to the day after the fire, the Patterson house stood bathed in soft spring sunlight. The promise tree, though still young, had sprouted its first leaves, tiny green declarations of life and renewal. Around its base, wildflowers planted by the children bloomed in a riot of color. Inside, the home buzzed with activity. William moved between kitchen and dining room, straightening place settings on the large farmhouse table he had crafted with his own hands. Each chair was unique, personalized for its owner with subtle details only family would notice, a carved bird for Emma, who had discovered a passion for birdwatching, baseball bats for Jackson, tiny flowers for Alice, and superhero emblems for Matthew. Need any help? Sheriff Davis asked, arriving early with his wife, Clara, arms laden with casserole dishes. Everything's under control, William assured them, though his nervous energy suggested otherwise. Elizabeth and the girls are finishing up in the workshop. The workshop had evolved over the past year, transforming from William's solitary sanctuary to the heart of their family business. Crafted with Love had begun as a simple furniture operation but quickly grew into something more. Elizabeth's elegant designs, combined with William's masterful craftsmanship, had attracted attention far beyond Maple Creek. Their waiting list now stretched 6 months, with orders coming from as far away as Seattle and Boston. What began as necessity had blossomed into purpose, allowing Elizabeth to channel her design education while William found renewed pride in creating heirlooms rather than just functional pieces. Together, they built not just furniture, but a legacy their children could inherit one day. Jackson appeared from upstairs, carefully carrying a large wrapped package. At 11, he had grown taller, more confident, fully embracing his role as big brother to Elizabeth's children. Is it time yet, Dad? He asked, excitement barely contained. William checked his watch. Almost. Why don't you help Matthew with his tie? He was struggling last I checked. As Jackson disappeared upstairs, Elizabeth entered through the back door. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, a smudge of wood stain on her cheek. But to William, she had never looked more beautiful. The girls are just washing up, she said, crossing to his side. Everything looks perfect. He reached out, gently wiping the smudge from her face. Just like its designer. She smiled, the kind of unguarded expression that had once been rare but now came naturally. Nervous? A little, he admitted. It's not every day you celebrate becoming a family. Officially. The past year had brought challenges alongside triumphs. Richard had eventually withdrawn his custody fight, not from kindness, but from self-preservation. His business practices had come under federal investigation, and a public custody battle would have exposed details he couldn't afford to have scrutinized. The substantial settlement he offered, accepted on the condition he maintained only limited, supervised contact with the children, had provided security without strings. More importantly, the legal proceedings were finally over. Today wasn't just a housewarming or business celebration, but the day William and Elizabeth would announce their engagement to their closest friends and the children. Guests began arriving, filling the home with laughter and conversation. Mayor Thompson and his wife, Martha Grayson, and her husband, Dr. Roberts, Coach Miller, teachers, neighbors, the entire support system that had carried them through their darkest days now gathered to share their brightest. When everyone had assembled in the spacious living room, William clinked a spoon against his glass. The room quieted as he and Elizabeth stood together, their children gathered around them. A year ago, William began, his voice steady, I stood on a patch of ashes where our home used to be. Many of you stood with me then, and you're here again today, not because of tragedy, but because of triumph. Elizabeth took his hand, continuing where he left off. When I left my old life, I was searching for safety. What I found instead was strength, in this community, in William, and in myself. She smiled down at the children. And in these remarkable young people who have taught us all about resilience. William squeezed her hand. Today, we want to share some news. Last week, I asked Elizabeth to marry me. And I said yes," Elizabeth finished, her free hand raising to display a simple wooden ring inlaid with a small diamond, her old wedding ring stone reimagined as a symbol of transformation rather than ownership. The room erupted in cheers and congratulations. The children bounced with excitement, having kept the secret admirably since witnessing William's proposal beneath the promise tree days earlier. Jackson stepped forward with the wrapped package he'd been guarding. "We made something for you both," he said as Emma, Alice, and Matthew crowded around. Inside was a sign crafted from salvaged wood from the old house, each letter carved and painted by the children. It read, "Family isn't where you come from. It's who you come home to." Later, as the celebration continued on the wide front porch and sprawling lawn, Elizabeth and William stood beside the promise tree, watching their children play with neighborhood friends. "I used to measure wealth in square footage and stock portfolios," Elizabeth mused. "Now, I measure it in laughter and memories." William's arm encircled her waist, pulling her close. "And I used to think surviving was enough. You showed me how to live again." As twilight settled over Maple Creek, the promise tree cast a lengthening shadow across their new beginning, not a perfect ending to their story, but a perfect continuation for this family, crafted with patience, strengthened through adversity, and bound by choice rather than obligation. The greatest masterpiece wasn't built of wood or stone, but of love's enduring foundation.